I'm Nicola Talent, and you can listen to my brand new podcast, Beast, The Murder of Nora Sheehan, streaming now, wherever you get your podcasts. So you guys get all the good stories, can I just say, by the way? The PSNI gives so much information into court cases and gives so many sort of headlines all the time, and sometimes the Crown prosecutors as well. Because actually there's two things in what we're going to talk about. But firstly, Mark, the Chicken Lovell's daughter, Whitney, clearly born maybe when there was a certain female songstress at the height of her fame. But anyway, she has basically been named in court this week as the head of an organised crime group, which is just so unusual for a woman, a 31-year-old in this case, to be named as that.
It is, and the thing is that what the allegation against her is, and remember these are only allegations, she's currently on remand awaiting trial, is that she has basically taken over from the fact that her father, Mark Lovell, was murdered as part of this feud, but also her brother, Ebony Hughes, again, musical reference there, is missing, and no one knows where Ebony is. Ebony's taken himself off. We believe him to be in Australia. And by default, they oversee quite a large drugs empire. And by default, the prosecution are now saying that Whitney is the boss. She is the mob lady. She is in charge of this gang. Those two men in her family who she was said to have worked quite closely alongside. I think she faces around a dozen charges connected to the supply of drugs. Very serious drugs charges. She was released on compassionate bail to attend her father's funeral. Whitney at this stage, I think she's only 31. And then she tried to get her bail conditions changed. She said she wanted to go to Dublin for the weekend with her partner, and the PSNI opposed this. The reason why they opposed it is they're saying that she has quite a network in the Dublin area. She's the head of an organised crime group in Newry. Mm-hmm. The officer told the court, and so her application to change her bail conditions to cross the border was denied by the judge. But yet bail hearings in Northern Ireland can be really, really detailed. Sometimes it's interesting because some of the evidence that we report that's presented in bail hearings doesn't actually make it into the actual trial. And at times, the defence will accuse the prosecution and the police of putting stuff in bail hearings that have no intentions of introducing an evidence later on. But in this case, we can see from the background of what Ebony Hughes was accused of and what her father, who was the head of a very violent gang before his murder. What he had been accused of in all those times, you can see how this is now fallen to the daughter, which, as you says, is very unusual. A very petite, very pretty, very young girl. She doesn't look like your typical mob boss. But that's what they have claimed the court. And I suppose for these purposes, because she is before the courts, so we don't want to say anything outside what has been said during this bail hearing. So let's talk about her father, Mark the Chicken Lovell, who was killed in December. The chicken, now where is that coming from? Chicken legs? Mark Lovell, it's a very interesting sort of makeup of a family. So they're sort of half Romanian and half the mother is obviously from here. She is from Ireland. The Mark Lovell was one of those people who had sort of for a while sort of went under the radar. We knew that he was involved in all sorts of serious criminality, but that obviously came to a head when he very foolishly, some might say, crossed the Shani Brothers, who are, they're proper gangsters, you're not messing around with them. And so that was when there was an attack on his life. He escaped the attack on his life, but his dog was killed in that gun attack. And then he was eventually then shot dead. But at the time, there was some papers trying to report that he was shot because the gang was trying to get Ebony Hughes, his son, and they couldn't get him, so they just shot the father. But, that wasn't what I was told. I was told that they were clearly out to get Mark Lovell. That's why she said that they tried to kill him shortly before this, and then they eventually shot him in Newry, outside his home. He was sitting in Ardkeen Park when he was shot in close range while he was sitting in his car, which is a very sort of common occurrence we see here. And those sort of hits, what people do is they'll wait until someone arrives outside their house, they'll turn their keys off in their car and they'll go to get out. And that's obviously the time when they're sort of vulnerable to attack. And we've seen that loads of times here.
So this is a complex situation, and there's a lot of big hitters that are going to be named over the next wee while in gangland. Some of them have passed away, but the Shani Brothers, talk about them, because they were certainly part and parcel of a southern crew until they moved north, and they've been based in Newry for probably, 10 years?
Yeah, and I mean, the Shani Brothers are, I suppose, they're fascinating. I know people who have known them and spoke to them personally, and they say they're highly intelligent, highly educated. Their father was Libyan, and they spent most of their childhood, part of their childhood at least, in Libya, and then they moved back when they were age, when Nal Shabani was 11 and Ahmed Shabali, his brother, was 13. They lived in Donamead for a while before they moved to Newry. I mean, you would know better than I, but that's the sort of, they became involved in those feuds in the north side of Dublin. That is a saturated market when it comes to gangland crime.
Yeah.
And the two of them were clever enough to realise that and realise, look, this is a flooded market. Where can we go? Newry is right on the border. You know, you're across the border in minutes, but you have the sort of protection of being in Northern Ireland, and a lot of those southern gangs at that time, maybe that's changed. I didn't particularly like coming across the border. And so they settled up there and set up their empire there, and they were feared, and rightly so.
There was a lot of movement actually around that time, because it was then that they were bringing in these anti-gang laws, you know, and a lot of people were afraid that there was going to be even tattoos were going to link them to gangs, and that they were going to be targeted. So quite a few people scattered to the wind. It was a little bit like when the Criminal Assets Bureau set up. They obviously went there and settled. Now, they were very much strongly linked to a criminal known as Mr. Big down here. Mr. Big would be one of the top targets of the Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau, probably the top target in the country. I don't think I'm exaggerating by saying that. So they basically fell out with Lavelle and his crew.
Another guy called Colm McDonald. So McDonald had survived an assassination attempt in Newry last year. He was lured to an industrial estate. I don't know where it was, on the premise that there was some sort of deal or some sort of peacekeeping mission, that they were going to try and organise a truce. But when he got there was an attempt on his life. He somehow managed to survive that. The car that was involved in that attack was found on the other side of the border. But one of the Shabani gangs, a guy called Stephen Morgan, who is an ex-army, he's ex-military trained, he was arrested in relation to the gun attack on McDonald, and then he was then targeted himself in probably one of the worst gang attacks that I've ever heard of. You know, he was battered, his arms was broken, but he had acid poured all over him, including all over his groin. And he's completely scarred for life as a result of that. So they poured acid all over his head, all over his arm, and all over his groin. And that was, I think, when Mark Lovell's death warrant was signed, him and his son Ebony.
I mean, that's a violence beyond most of what we hear, isn't it?
It's strange because, I mean, this is obviously Arish Gangland stuff. I mean, these are just cross-border gangs. Yeah. But when you think about it, there's such an international aspect to it. You know, on one side you have the Shabanis, who are Libyan Irish, and then on the other side, you know, you have the Hughes Lovells, who are Romanian Irish. And so that entitles you to access to quite a few passports. So as the result of the Good Friday Agreement, I can hold a British passport or an Irish passport, or both. I can have both at the same time. And in terms of then the Hugheses, then we know that Ebony Hughes had a Romanian passport, a British passport, and an Irish passport, because of obviously his heritage. So it gives you a lot of documents that can help you move around the place, because you spell your name using the Irish spelling of the name in one passport, the English spelling of a name in the other passport, the Romanian spelling of a name in another one, and you can see how you can shift around the place. And that's basically, this is Irish gangland warfare, let's face it, but there's also, let's face it, you know, some kind of international aspect to it, which meant that they disappear and come back quite often, these people. You know, they'll be gone for long periods of time. Nobody will know where they went, and then the next thing you know, they'll appear back again.
And it's interesting as well, because while this feud is centred in Newry, which isn't an enormous town, it's a very handy town to live if you want to cross the border a lot, But there's tentacles that reach out further. We've spoken about Mr. Big being the top target of the guards down here. But this feud was actually brought up during another bail hearing involving two men who are charged in relation to a conspiracy charge in relation to the murder of Robbie Lawler in Ardoyne, something that we have been working a lot on over the past few months, and we will eventually get there with our project. But anyway, we'll park that for the moment. But yeah, this was brought up, wasn't it, during the bail hearing for Robbie Lawler? It was brought up and dropped fairly quickly.
Project Tears bail hearing, they brought it up twice in relation to this, and they said that one of the objections to bail was that he was involved in another gangland feud taking place in Newry in which a man had been killed, and nobody who had spoken to at that time
in reflection then that the murder of Robbie Lawler was.
So then, by inference, she would have been putting the Lawler murder in the middle of all that as well. And listen, there is no doubt these people's past may have well crossed at some point in time, because they do, because that criminal underworld, they know each other, either as enemies or allies. And so there's a very real chance that Lawler, the Shabanis, all of these people have maybe crossed paths at one point, but there was absolutely no indication whatsoever that the two incidents are linked. You know, one is a very specific feud involving two gangs, and the other one is a very specific feud involving two very different gangs. You know, so whether or not, you know, maybe sometimes somebody has done a deal for money, or they've maybe purchased weapons, or they've had some sort of fallout or whatever, that could well have happened in the past, but that wasn't, they weren't linked. I mean, I still can't understand where that was coming from, and it hasn't been mentioned again since. So maybe the police.
Well, Lawler would certainly have been said to have had beef with Mr. Big. Mr. Big's outfit had beef with him. We'll just dwell on that for a wee moment, because it remains one of the most fascinating gangland murders of recent times. And Robbie Lawler was killed, of course, in April 2020. His body was found, well, he was shot dead basically in the garden of a house in Ardoyne. Three men are now before the courts on sort of conspiracy charges. They're not actually up for murder.
No, and the thing about it is not even the defence have been given the information as to who the PSNI believe the actual gunman was. All we know is that the people who that they have charged, that they're claiming that they were involved in this conspiracy, either at a very low level or a very high level. But, you know, we do have a joint enterprise murder charge here. So, you know, if someone is driving a getaway car in which, you know, they think someone's going to rob a house or rob a shop, but they're going to murder someone, they could very well find themselves charged with murder in relation to that because of the joint enterprise aspect of it. So that's what the police are arranging. This is joint enterprise. It involved quite a few people. But the interesting thing is that the people who are widely believed, you know, in the gangland world to have organised that shooting, one of them is dead, shot dead himself by dissident Republicans. Another one is dead and died of illness. And the other ones were not even told. They were briefly arrested and released, and were not even told in relation to what those statements that they give at that time or what was said. It's not even being disclosed to the court. There seems to be a bit of secrecy around it, and it's something that, you know, we will dig down to and we will get to the bottom of. But I mean, it's a very tangled web. But the PSNI seem to be going for the sort of low-hanging fruit, if you know what I mean. You know, the people who are easy to get a hold of, the sort of maybe the low-level criminals who were hanging around these gangs, probably thought they were great big lads, you know, knowing all these bad boy gangsters, but were completely out of their depth in terms of that. And it doesn't seem to be that the people who had the most to gain, let's say, from Robbie Lawler's murder, don't seem to be in the loop at all. But I mean, you know, we'll find out more if and when that ever comes to trial. The slow pace of justice in Northern Ireland is something I was also writing about this week. You know, trials are taken.
It feels like it's one of the Robbie Lawler murder. It feels like it's one of those sort of jigsaws that you'd sort of upend out of the box thinking this is going to be easy. And then you realise that it's just not. And you are months and months sort of working on it, trying to bring it together. And it feels as if that Lavelle murder, the Mark Lavelle Lovell murder would have been maybe out here as you're trying to get to the centre. It's somewhere. There's so many. There's just so many webs coming out from that.
There's so many characters.
Yes.
There's so many agendas. There's so many, people who had beefs, people who had alliances, unlikely alliances, enemies coming together. My enemy's enemies, my friend stuff. It's very complicated. And as you said, it's a jigsaw. And right now, someone has a whole lot of the pieces in their back pocket. They're handing them over for it to be put together,
Exactly.
For us to get to the bottom of exactly what's going on.
Yeah, but we are making some progress in it, and
we will. The Cagney and Lacey of the crime report.
Right,
we'll get to
a few more glasses of wine maybe to help us along the way, but nonetheless,
we will get there.
We will, but it feels like it's like a snapshot into what is happening in gangland in Ireland and who's with who, and you have sort of the Dundons in Limerick, you have the Drogheda feud and all that's going on there, the Maguires, you've Cornelius Price, you have Mr. Big in Dublin, and you have all the characters then up in the north, and it's like as if we're just getting a view into what's happening in just one moment.
Warren Crossan, the son of the guy who was at one stage in charge of the Continuity IRA in Northern Ireland, his son chucked into the middle of all this. Then he's gone down in the street by dissident Republicans, a few months later. It's a very tangled web.
It is. And I can't wait to hear it on a 10-part podcast that will be coming out next year.
Stay tuned.
But anyway, yes. So look, back to the original point of this. Women have a place in the underworld in gangland, and it's usually on the arm of a man as kind of candy. We're also talking this week down here about there's been a move to kind of charge a lot of them on money laundering offences. There's been a gangster's moll in the west of Ireland this week who thought she was going to get a suspended sentence having pleaded guilty to money laundering, and she was told that her children will not shield her from the consequences of her criminality. She's been sent to jail. So, the women have sort of always stayed in the background. Maybe there's been this sort of element of them, teetering around on Louboutin heels with their designer handbags, enjoying the proceeds of crime, but actually not getting involved in the crime, turning a blind eye, or maybe just being too dim to understand what the husband's or the man is doing. So this is quite unique and unusual for a woman to be named or to be alleged to be in charge of a group.
Yeah, and I mean, from up north, the role that we say that women play, they provide alibis on occasions. They, as you say, they are the money launderers. I've rarely met a drug dealer whose wife doesn't own the most successful nail bar in all of the world. Do you know what I mean? or an eyelash bar. I didn't even know an eyelash bar is a thing, but apparently you can fund 4 holidays a year to Dubai on one of them. It's they provide that role of they are the glamorous woman who and then they go, I'm a businesswoman. This is my money. I'm earning this money. And you're thinking, God, why did I become a journalist? I should have done that. Yeah, I should have done that. That looks like it's. But yeah, and they are starting to crack down on that. We've also seen here shops that are believed to be linked, whether it be hair salons or nail salons or beauty salons, believed to be linked to the girlfriends of people who would be known to be high-ranking drug dealers being attacked. Graffiti spread on them, arson attacks. On one occasion, a gun attack. There was shots fired through it when it was closed in the evening. But just these sort of wardens, to the sort of money end of it, where the money gets washed, that then becomes part of the target. But yeah, we've never heard. I mean, I'm trying to think back. I've never heard of a woman being named in, I suppose, a case like this as being the gang boss. And that's the difference. We'd have women who play a very major role in helping keep that front, because they provide the front, they provide the respectable face, of the drug dealing gang. They provide the alibis, where was he? Well, he was with me, I can prove, but they say that she is the boss, and the boss of a very, very scary mob of people.
It's extraordinary. I mean, I suppose up the ranks a little bit, they get a status as being sometimes the first wife or whatever. Down the ranks is where, there's a tragedy to it almost, because usually we're dealing with sort of underprivileged areas, maybe marginalised areas, where the women, some of them, the young girls, their hope is to grab the tails of an upcoming drug dealer so as they can have that status, and it sort of pulls them out in some way of what they feel is a hopelessness.
I mean, it is, I suppose, when you think about, if you looked at like working class areas in the north of England or whatever at one time in the 90s or 2000s, it was get yourself a footballer, be a wag. Whereas, in the places where, that we work, it was get yourself a drug dealer. A man who's knocking out gear, he'll keep you fucking in the style of which you want to become accustomed.
Yeah, keep you in your designer handbags. But anyway, look, a great story, a really interesting twist in that. And that case is not before, is that Diplock or not?
No, it'll not be Diplock. That'll have a jury. There's a mad load of cases that are attached to it, because we talked about, the whole Stevie Morgan and the acid attack on him. And then there was another attack. There was 2 guys sleeping in a caravan, and a gang came in with hatchets and tried to behead one of them and cut their hands off. That was then linked to that feud as well. This isn't the kind of feud where people, are doing drive-by shootings. This is kind of feud where they're throwing acid over people and trying to chop their hands off. There's a very, an almost medieval, aspect to it. Yeah.
It certainly doesn't sound like something that's playing out in the streets in Newry the last time I looked. But
Newry has been quite quiet since Whitney Hughes has taken off, and since the Lovell murder, and obviously Whitney Hughes is subject to incredibly tight bail restrictions. The Shabanis are sort of tied down, and I think now Shabani's still in prison at this point in time. The Shabanis are tied down as well. But, the thing about it is those prison sentences, they might get 5 or 6 years for this, or, 4 or 5 years for that. And then it eventually all rolls around. And then what you see is the next generation of them, the younger brothers, the younger sisters, they all join in on it as well. So I doubt it's over, because the feeling between these people is so bad. I mean, this is proper, fight to the death stuff, because it has been so violent. So I doubt we've heard the last of it. Maybe some of the court restrictions are keeping a lid on it for now, but it could definitely kick off again.
Right. Well, listen, you have a million and one things to write, as usual, for the Belfast Telegraph tomorrow. We'll talk next week, and God knows what will pop up in the north, because we're going to be yapping certainly at least once a week and putting out an episode which will be very relatable to people in the north of Ireland from here on in. Or so that is our aspiration, isn't it?
It's amazing how much, since we have started speaking, that there is so much crossover. Yeah. Like the people who you've been writing about, the people I've been writing about, all of a sudden we realise they're working quite closely with each other, and that border doesn't exist when it comes to criminality.
That's it for sure. Well, listen, Allison, thank you very much.
No problem.
Have a good weekend. I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.